Welcome to Release Readiness Live. I'm Ella Marks. I'm on the admin relations team here at Salesforce, and I'm your host for today's broadcast. We're broadcasting from our home studios all this week to share some new features in the Spring 21 release. After our product team shares the highlights, we'll spend some time taking questions on the air. We'll be monitoring both the Release Readiness Trailblazer community and Twitter, so post your questions as soon as you can and use the hashtag SalesforceLive. I recommend posting your longer, more detailed questions in the community where the conversation can continue after the webcast. If we don't get to your question on the air, we'll be sure to follow up with you within a few days. All of our webcasts will be available on the Salesforce Live website for later viewing. Since we may be covering the roadmap, we'll be making some forward-looking statements, so please make your purchasing decisions based on currently available functionality. Now, let's get started with Salesforce Flow and meet our product managers.
Thanks, Ella. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Jaffe, and I'm going to kick us off today by talking to you about our record-triggered flows. The question we get a lot is, which automation tool should I use? We have Flow, but we also already have Workflow Rules and Process Builder in the same platform. Where do I get started? The thing I want you to remember is that Flow is the future. We are investing heavily to make Flow your one-stop shop for all your no-code, admin-friendly automation needs. Unfortunately, it does take more than one release to make Flow that one-stop shop, and many of you have already heavily invested in existing automation with either Process Builder or Workflow Rules. I know it can feel like a moving target as we keep closing feature gaps and adding new functionality, but we are getting closer and closer every release. So I encourage you to keep Flow in mind as you build out or revise any triggered automation. Rather than ask you to get out a pencil and paper, I'm going to instead encourage you to bookmark our Automation Architects Guide. If you go to architect.salesforce.com, you'll find a variety of useful resources, but I want to point you to one in particular, our Record Triggered Automation Decision Guide. This will walk you through some of the trade-offs between different automation tools and includes an up-to-date list of any feature gaps between Workflow Rules, Process Builder, and Flow. It also has a deep dive into the performance implications and addresses when it may be appropriate to use Apex instead. It's a great place for you to stay up to date on the latest changes without having to keep track yourself, and it gives us a chance to share those details and nuances that we won't have time for today. So one thing the Architect's Guide has already been updated with is our new Spring 21 features. I'm so excited to introduce our two big updates, prior record value and scheduled paths. To start, let's talk about prior record value. One of the key pieces of information you need to know when designing automation to trigger on a record update is the before and after state. So if my user updates this account record to change the billing state to Texas, I may want to also customize my automation based on what state it was prior to their change, in this case, California. Maybe I want to notify the West Coast regional manager that they've changed zones, or maybe I need to let accounting know about a specific tax implication. Let's see this in Flow Builder. I have set up a flow to run whenever an account gets updated, and I want to send my support manager a notification if a customer downgrades their support tier from Premium. Let's set up a decision element to configure that logic. Across all the standard elements in Flow, we provide this resource selector, which allows you to access all the different information you have available to act on in your flow. Our record-triggered flows have used this to give you access to the triggering record, shown here as $record, which let you see what kinds of updates or fields have been set on your record. We've added to that functionality with a parallel resource for the prior value of your record, called $recordPrior. This gives you the same set of rich information about your record but for its previous state, and includes it everywhere out of the box in a record update flow. So back to my example, checking billing state on record prior would give me California, but checking it on record would give me Texas. Now we go back to the decision. I'm going to use the prior record resource to check the support tier that was set prior to the update and check if that equals Premium. I'm also going to check that the current support tier, which I can get by using the $record resource, is no longer premium, which should give me a clear answer. For more complex logic that tracks multiple changes, I recommend using this in conjunction with our option here at the bottom, which will allow you to only execute this decision if the total criteria logic is different for the triggering record's current and prior states. But I don't think we need to set that here for this case. Once that's been activated, I can go to an account and change its support from premium to standard. You can see that my support manager has received an email, but they will only receive it if this specific change has happened. A change from standard to basic would not send an email, nor will any other unrelated updates. This is just a small example of what you can do with prior record value, but there are plenty of other use cases. So go ahead and take it for a spin in Spring 21. We've given you the functionality of the formula prior value, but designed it to work natively in Flow, so you can build out your logic visually and access your data in even more places. The other major feature we've added to Flow, which comes from the world of Process Builder and workflow rules, is our scheduled paths. If you are familiar with our other tools, this feature is Flow's equivalent to scheduled actions in Process Builder or time-dependent actions in workflow rules. If you aren't familiar with those, allow me to explain. Your Salesforce records are full of dates and times, like a contract renewal date or a 72-hour window to respond to a support case, and you can automate your flow to act in relation to those dates rather than directly when a user takes an action. This can help you set up reminders for times that could be months in the future or create follow-up tasks after some time has passed. Let's say I'm using Flow to track a renewing membership, and I am using a custom object to track my members and their status. This flow is going to do a few things. First, when a record is created, it will set the renewal date to 1 year in the future. Next, we've set up several independent scheduled paths to follow up on that renewal. So the flow will send a reminder when you are a month away from renewal, as well as send a more urgent reminder when you are a week away. And if you reach that renewal date, it will set off a process to make you inactive. You can configure these paths as follows. You need to select a source for your date and time. This can be any date or time field on your object, and it can also be from when the trigger actually happened. You then have the option to select an offset, so you count backwards or forwards by either days or hours if, like us, you want to send a reminder before the date occurs. In this case, I want to run this path when the renewal date arrives, so I've set an offset of 0 here. But for the others, I've set them to be days before the renewal actually happens. Let's see this in action. I'm creating a new member, and you'll see that as soon as I save, it's going to update the renewal date to be a year from now. The system has also set up those future scheduled paths to run based on that date. We can see these by going to the time-based workflow page in Setup. As I refresh, you'll see that I now have new items set to run several months from now, all based on my newly created member. I can use this page to delete these paths if they were made inadvertently, but I don't need to do that if I've structured my flow correctly. Let's say we want to offer the option to opt out of renewal. I can set up my conditions in the Start node to check whether opt-out is true or false. In this case, if the member has opted out, we won't run the flow or set up the renewal reminders and processes. Now, these flows will adjust dynamically as your data continues to change, so we don't have to wait 11 months to see the end of this demo. I'm going to change my renewal date to be less than a month from now. If I check my scheduled paths, I'll see that my dates have changed. And if I go to my email and refresh, I'll see that the 1-month reminder email was sent. If I want to make another change and switch Astro to opt out, let's say they received the email and didn't want to renew, Then you'll see, as I refresh, that all the future scheduled paths for renewal are gone. This is because we set up that criteria in the start node to exclude anyone who selected opted out from our renewal paths. If you use your entry conditions well, you can make sure to only run the scheduled paths that will be truly impactful for your users, and you can trust that they will run based on the most up-to-date information in your organization. Now, if you're familiar with Flow, then you may know that we also have a way to trigger flows on a schedule, and you may be wondering, what's the difference? Here's a quick summary. If you start with your automation problem, what kind of date and time are you triggering from? If it's based on data in your system, like when an opportunity is closed, then scheduled paths is the right choice. If you want to schedule based on the calendar, like say on February 9th, or on a repeating basis, like every day or every week, then scheduled flows is your best bet. When it comes to how your automation is propagated through the system, then that differs as well. Scheduled paths will be generated as new objects are created or updates are made. If instead you have a large batch of records and need to make a one-time pass through them, then you can schedule that using scheduled flows instead. Paths are dynamic and unique to individual records, while scheduled flows are useful if you are thinking about something like a regular cleanup task, for example. Lastly, I want to share a special pro tip for our advanced Flownatics who may be dealing with integrations or external objects. You may know that you can't use our update records to call an external object from inside a record-triggered flow. Well, now you can use a scheduled path with an offset of 0 to run as soon as your initial record change has been completed. You are essentially spinning off a separate flow that is triggered by the record change, but only happens after it successfully completes. Since this is a separate flow, you can use it to perform operations on external objects or to use invocable actions that contain an external callout. If that explanation didn't resonate with you, then don't worry. We have more coming for integrations in the future. But for those of you who have wrestled with this in the past, this is a really handy new function to configure what you need. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Sam, who will take us through the wonderful world of screen flows.
Thanks, Diana. It's so cool to see how far triggered flows have come. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Raynard. I'm another member of the Flow product team. As Diana hinted, I work on screen flows, making it easier for you to build rich, awe-inspiring screens. For the next few minutes, we're diving in on some Spring 21 features you should be aware of if you work with screen flows, or even if you're just thinking about it.
This includes some features that make it easier to build the screens themselves, and one that makes it easier for you to work with integrations. For good measure, we'll also cover a couple of general enhancements. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. The feature I'm most excited to talk to you about today is our beta section component. We're finally bringing you the ability to create multi-column layouts in your Flow screens directly from Flow Builder. If you want to take better advantage of your screen's real estate, you'll want to start playing with sections immediately. Because this is built on the Lightning design system, Flow columns obey the same responsiveness rules as the rest of Lightning experience. If the container is small enough, like on a phone, the columns stack vertically. The mechanics of working with the screen component are pretty simple. You open up your screen in Flow Builder, look for the section component in the palette, and drag it onto the canvas. You can add up to 4 columns, and you can control the width of each column separately. Then it's just a matter of dragging other components into the columns. By default, all the columns have equal widths, but you could easily control how much of the available space each column should take up. You can use thinner columns to add your own gutters and customize the spacing around your fields. And don't worry, you can leave columns empty if you want to. On top of all that, sections also support conditional visibility, which means you can make your visibility rules work harder. For example, let's say I need to make these 4 fields, first name, last name, position, and date, visible only if the checkbox above is selected. Rather than configuring the exact same rule 4 different times, I can simply add one rule to the surrounding section. We're so excited to hear what you think about the section component and to see what kinds of layouts you create to make your screens more streamlined and engaging. Now let's talk about screen components. Screens can easily get complicated with all the forward and backward navigation that users are doing. One thing that's come up frequently in feedback is this scenario. Let's say your flow has two screens. You, as a user, enter some stuff in screen A, then you hit next and enter some stuff in screen B, but then you realize you missed something, so you navigate back to screen A, update your entry there, and then go again to screen B. Now, the question that gets raised is, when you visit a screen for the second time, how do we expect the values to be handled? Should we defer to whatever the user entered on the original visit and retain those prior values? Or should we refresh the values in case some changes in another part of the flow need to be incorporated? We call this whole concept revisited values. This is actually a trick question. The answer is all of the above. It depends on your use case. Let's walk through a couple of examples. First up, a basic survey. After entering their mailing address on the second screen, the user goes back to the first screen to correct their phone number. When they revisit the second screen, we expect the previously entered mailing address to still be present or retained. Now, the second example. On screen 1, we enter a zip code. Screen 2 uses that zip code to automatically populate some values. When we go back and change the zip code and then revisit screen 2, the fields should use the latest and greatest zip code, so we want the values to be refreshed. New in Spring 21, we give you the power to decide how you want your screen components to treat values when they are revisited. You'll find this setting under the Advanced section in your Components Property Editor. It's available only for Lightning components, which applies to both custom components and a subset of standard ones, like toggle, slider, and email. Last but not least, let's talk about integrations. Earlier, Diana gave you a taste of the possibilities of integrating with services like Slack, but they're certainly not limited to trigger use cases. You can add that kind of magic to your screen flows too. If you've ever built a flow that integrates with another service or API, you've probably seen this error message. It's pretty ugly, and most of the phrases in here are confusing to the average admin. Let's talk a bit about what this error actually means and why you're seeing it. It all centers around a developer concept called transactions. At a high level, transactions are how Salesforce groups operations together to be executed. Anytime a flow executes an action, whether that's updating records, posting a chatter, or integrating with Slack, it does so in the context of a transaction. To understand why this error occurred and how you can avoid it in the future, there are a few things you need to know about flows and transactions. First, in screen flows, every element in between two screens is executed in a single transaction. For this example flow, that means the record create and the Slack integration will be executed together. We've drawn this blue box basically to visually represent this transaction. Second, the operations are committed at the end of the transaction. This is to make sure that everything is successful before we commit the changes to the database. If that sounds confusing, think about when you're purchasing groceries. The cashier rings up your groceries, but you can't actually take them home until you've successfully paid for everything. For this example, the flow executes the record create, but the new user record isn't committed to the database until everything in the blue box is successfully executed and the transaction finishes. Third, you can't make a call out if the transaction already executed a data element or sent an email. This ties back to the second item. The user record isn't committed until the transaction finishes. So, between when the record create is executed and when the transaction finishes, we consider that operation pending. The problem is, there's no guarantee how quickly a callout will finish. It could be instantaneous, or it could take minutes or hours. The transaction can't stand around with its pending operations waiting until the callout is finished. This is because it would require system resources to be reserved for an indeterminate amount of time, and those resources are shared on the Salesforce multi-tenant architecture. Now, let's take this back to the grocery analogy. You're purchasing some groceries. After the cashier has rung up all of your items, but before you've paid, you get a call from your partner asking you to also bring home a couple gallons of milk. But it wouldn't be fair to ask the cashier to wait for you to go grab the additional items because there are other customers waiting to purchase their own groceries. Now, that was a lot of technical content. Thank you for bearing with me. In summary, the three things you need to know about transactions in Flow are: 1. Everything in between two screens is executed together in one transaction. 2, records are not committed until the transaction finishes. And 3, callouts are not allowed if there's pending work, like a record create or an email that happened earlier in the transaction. Now that we've got a basic understanding of transactions under our belt, let's take another look at that error message. Here, uncommitted work pending means that there's a database operation in this transaction already. That's the record create. So we're not allowed to make a call out here. But all is not lost. We can commit that pending work and close the transaction, and then we can safely make our call out. Previously, there were 2 ways in ScreenFlows that you could resolve this issue and commit the pending work. In between the data operations and the callout, you could either place a screen or a local action. In fact, we published a local action on Unofficial SF to help with this use case. It is very originally named Commit Transaction. Let's go back yet again to our grocery analogy. Remember, we were in the middle of checking out at the grocery store when our partner called to ask us to purchase some milk too. When we say we need to commit the pending work, that's as if you finish your original grocery purchase, but then go back into the store, find the requested milk, and return to the cashier to make your second purchase separately. The good news is that with Spring 21, this workaround of using a local action that I've been talking about to resolve this issue, it's no longer necessary. We've introduced an advanced setting to the action element so you can let Flow decide whether a fresh transaction is needed. When this option is selected, the Flow checks whether the action is a callout and whether there's any pending work in the transaction. If both of those are true, it commits the pending work, closes the current transaction, and then safely executes the call in a new transaction. The result is the same as if you were using a local action, but with significantly less work for you. For Flow to make the most informed decision, it needs to know whether the actions you're using are callouts. We've added a callout tag to the invocable method annotation so developers can flag whether their action makes a callout or not. If you use custom Apex actions, we recommend asking your developer to add this callout tag where appropriate. In all net new actions, whether in an existing flow or a new one, they default to letting Flow decide. All existing actions continue to behave as they did before Spring 21, but we recommend updating them to let Flow decide. Now let me show you how easy it is to update your existing actions to use this functionality. Here we have our employee onboarding flow. It does a bunch of different things, both inside and outside Salesforce. So we've had to employ the local action workaround that we talked about earlier. This element is a local action. Its only job is to let us execute this Slack callout in a fresh transaction. First, let's update the Slack callouts transaction control setting. We want the flow to automatically decide how to handle the transaction for us. We simply select Let Flow Decide and click Done. Now that we've made that change, the local action is redundant, so we'll remove that element entirely. Bonus, thanks to the new auto layout mode, which you'll hear about in a bit from Brandon, we don't even have to redraw our connectors. We just save our changes, and that's it. Of course, as you update your existing actions to do this, make sure to test out your flows in a sandbox or another test environment to double check everything is working as you expect. The transaction control setting is available for all custom actions, as well as any standard actions that make callouts. However, this feature is only supported for screen flows. For auto-launched and triggered flows, the best workaround is still to use a new scheduled path or a pause element. Before we move on to the next segment, I want to share a couple more small updates. First, we made some tweaks to how components look when you run a screen flow. This is all to make sure your screens look as consistent and cohesive as possible. Most of these changes were small, like fixing the spacing between components, but the main change you'll notice is the component width. Starting with Spring 21, all components take up 100% of the available width. If you prefer shorter inputs like we used to have, that's a great use case for the new section component. Next up, let's talk about Lightning runtime errors. If you've built a screen flow over the past year or two, you're probably familiar with these errors in Flow Builder. They're intended to warn you that the flow you're building is not compatible with classic runtime. This usually happens because you're using a component or a feature that isn't supported in classic runtime, like lookup or the new section component or conditional visibility. We know those messages add more clutter than they do help, so we're avoiding displaying them where we can. Flow Builder no longer displays these warnings as long as your Salesforce org is configured to render all URL-based flows in Lightning Runtime. You can check this setting in your org's Process Automation Settings page in Setup.
That's a wrap for our ScreenFlow highlights for Spring 21. We're always excited to hear what you think about Flow and Flow Builder, so please don't be shy. And now it's time to shift gears and hear about debugging. You're really going to like what Tim's got to share with you.
Thanks, Sam. What an amazing and informative section that was. Pun intended. If you've missed the pun was that Sam talked about the new sections component in her section. Anyways, salutations, Flow Nation. My name is Tim, and I'm another PM on the Flow team. Now, I don't know about y'all, but for me, debugging flows, especially other people's flows, can be one of the most frustrating parts of my job. The worst is when I'm debugging a flow that was last updated by someone who left the company years ago. When I'm debugging, I generally follow the 5-step process outlined on this slide. I often find that the step that takes the most time, or at least seems to take the most time, is the very first step, getting a firm understanding of where the error occurred and exactly what the user did leading up to that error, so that I have the context I need to start hypothesizing what the root cause of the error might be. When the flow gets more and more complex, this step really starts to grind my gears, because I feel like I'm wasting a lot of time just trying to match what I'm seeing in the flow error email to the flow that I'm debugging in Flow Builder, and then connecting the dots to reconstruct the history. I often feel that this exercise is not a particularly high-value use of my time, and it hurts my brain to keep all that stuff in my head at once. So with Spring 21, we decided to just get rid of that. You'll start to see little hyperlinks at the top of your flow error emails that say, Flow error, click here to debug in Flow Builder. Click on one of those links within 14 days, wait a few seconds, and you'll be taken into Flow Builder, where you'll be able to see the path taken during that failed flow run, directly highlighted on the canvas, and the details of the run in the right-hand panel. What I love about this feature is it's dead simple. You don't have to do anything to set it up, and using it is pretty self-explanatory. However, there are a few important limitations. One of which is that this is not yet supported for flows built in the beta auto layout mode. Our engineers are working hard to fill that gap as we speak, so make sure you read the release notes for all the details. Now, why don't we kick it to a demo? I'm going to run through that employee onboarding flow Sam showed off earlier, but I'm going to make a fatal and apocalyptic mistake. I'm going to override Eric's email address with an invalid email address. Now I'll proceed through the flow as normal. First, I'll give Eric a shiny MacBook Pro and indicate that he will be working remotely. Next, I'll add him to a few Slack channels. Of course, I'll add him to the employee onboarding Slack channel, but I'm also going to add him to the jogging club, random, and general channels. Of course, it wouldn't be a Salesforce demo without some Quip goodness. So let's add Eric to the Bright Bank escalation processes folder. One more click, and I'll hit the infamous "an unhandled fault has occurred in this flow." Let's switch to my email inbox, and as expected, I receive a flow error email. But just look at the size of this thing. I've read books shorter than this email. Can you imagine trying to debug the flow from this email, especially if it wasn't your flow to begin with? Well, luckily, you don't have to do that anymore. Click on the link on the top of the email, wait a few seconds, and you'll see the exact path that was taken through the flow until it failed out on the very last email action element. Check out the details on the right-hand side and see that an invalid email address was provided. Now I can immediately start thinking about ways I can fix the issue. If I'm short on time, I could simply drop a fault connector out of that email action and handle the error right there. Or if I'm feeling ambitious, I could implement logic that would stop the user the moment they entered an invalid email address. This works for triggered flows too. For example, suppose there's a record create triggered flow on the employee object, and that this record create triggered flow is executed but fails when an employee record is created during the onboarding flow. Then I'd actually receive 2 emails. I'd receive one email for the onboarding flow with a link that show me there is an issue creating a new employee record, and another email for the employee record create triggered flow with a link that show me exactly where in that triggered flow the root problem occurred. And that's amazing. Spring 21 marks the 3rd release in a row where we've been able to make significant improvements to the Flow debugging experience. In Summer 20, in addition to a few quality of life improvements, we gave you the option to roll back database operations that were executed in an auto-launched Flow debug run so that you wouldn't have to spend time resetting all your test data. In Winter 21, we delivered the option to debug a flow as another user, as well as the ability to debug auto-launched flows directly on the canvas. And this release, in addition to one more feature that Brandon's going to talk about in a bit, we're providing for you all a way to skip the old debug from email workflow for when issues come up in the wild. It can be stressful when something unexpectedly goes wrong in production, and I hope this feature will go a long way toward making situations like these easier and faster to deal with. It's truly been a pleasure and a unique privilege to have been part of the development of features like these, and my team and I are deeply grateful and indebted to you all for the support and feedback you've provided us throughout this journey together. As I'm sure you're all well aware, there are a few more gaps we have to fill to really complete debugging and make it the best. I hope we will be able to continue relying on you all to help keep us honest and make sure that we are prioritizing the features that will make you and your organization successful. And now I'd like to throw the session over to Brandon to bring it home.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, my name is Brandon, and I have the pleasure of being a member of the product team. Now, I'd love to introduce you to some small but mighty features that we think will be surprisingly powerful for you. So let's get into it.
First, let's take a look at debugging schedule-triggered flows on the canvas. Now, in addition to non-triggered auto-launched flows, debugging directly on the canvas now supports schedule-triggered flows as well. Let's take a look at this feature in action. Here, we have a schedule-triggered flow that is set to run once a week. To debug on the canvas, all that I have to do is select the Debug on Canvas option. Select any other options that apply, and select Run. Now, I can see the path that my flow took. In this particular example, I can see that no accounts were found. As well, you have all of the standard debug information in the debug panel on the right. The last new feature in our Spring 21 release that we're talking about in this session is rich email formatting. This allows you to use the send email action to send email with rich text bodies. Previously, this action could only be used to send plain, unformatted text. And if you wanted to send a rich email from Flow, you would have needed to do so using an email alert, which can require a lot of work outside of the Flow builder. But now, as a part of our Spring 21 release, you can include bullets, bold or italicized text, and embedded images directly inside of the Flow builder. Any formatting that you can apply in a rich text template or a display text component, you can also apply to your email body. Let's take a look at this feature in action. The first step is to create a text template so that we can use rich text like bold, italics, bullets, and images. Once you have edited your template, then you will save it. We're going to need to reference it later in the send email action. Next, create a send email action. The first important callout is that the body will reference the text template that we made earlier. Also, be sure to complete any other necessary parameters. The last important callout in this demo is to make sure that you set the rich text formatted body parameter to true. That will allow your emails to render as rich formatted. And of course, as a quick reminder, we are so excited about our auto layout canvas feature, which is currently in beta. We're so excited about this feature because you will no longer have to worry about spending time to make your flows look neat. And you won't have to start your flows with that dreaded blank canvas syndrome. Let's review how to use the auto layout feature to transform your flow canvas. Here we can see that we have a complicated flow that takes advantage of branching, loops, etc. By simply clicking the Auto Layout Beta option, we can transform our canvas. Be sure to read any warnings before you enable. Now we can see that our new canvas is transformed to be Auto Layout. And anywhere in the canvas, you can insert a new element by clicking the plus icon and adding to the flow appropriately.
We hope that you've enjoyed hearing about our new features for this release. Our team is so excited for you to get your hands on these cool new features. We would also love any feedback that you have on any of the features that we've discussed. So please feel free to engage with us in the Salesforce automation group in the Trailblazer community. Right now, we're going to hand it back to Ella so that we can connect with you during our live Q&A session.
Thanks, Brandon, and thank you to all of the Flownatics out there who are joining us today. We've been seeing your excitement on Twitter and in the community. Steve Moe with McLovin the Possibilities. We see Tracy, Christy, Jake, Jen, so many of you are so excited. So thank you so much for joining us on Twitter and chiming in. We do have a lot of questions, so I want to get right to it. Let's dive in. Diana, I'm going to start with one for you. We have a lot of questions here. This question is coming from Steve Soltis, who's getting his flow question in early. We're in the process of looking at sending information from Salesforce to Qualtrics. It appears this needs to be done with an outbound message, which is only available in workflows. I think Flow would make this more powerful. So how can I send an outbound message in Flow?
Yeah, Steve is right. Today, you can only send outbound messages via workflow rules. That is on our roadmap to add to Flow. So in the architect's guide that I mentioned, we've highlighted the remaining gaps that exist between workflow rules, process builder, and Flow. And that's one of them that we're looking to fill in an upcoming release. So the other thing I'd mention is we also offer external services support in Flow today. So depending on your use case, he might be able to use that in Flow today as well instead of outbound messages.
Thanks, Diana. It sounds like that architect's resource is really great and everybody should check that out.
Market, yes.
Awesome. So for our next question, still for you, Diana, 2 questions actually from Deborah and Jordan. Can we access prior values in before update trigger flows and in after triggers?
Yes, so you can access them in both before and after save record triggered flows. If you're taking a look, one thing to make sure is that you have the update selected rather than create. So we don't offer a prior value if you're just creating because we know that the prior value won't exist. But as long as it's an update, you can do before or after.
Great, thanks. We have a question that came from Pierre. I've recently created my first before delete flow, which sends an email alert. Can I also pop a dialog box that says, hey, we just sent an email alert too at the end of that flow?
So you can't do that via a triggered flow, in part because sometimes triggered flows can happen because the system, say, deleted the record, in which case there's not an active UI to pop up. You may be able to do some creative things in screen flows if you want more of a process around deleting, but it would have to be via a screen flow and not via a record triggered flow.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Anne. Is there an easy way to upgrade a flow from an older version to a newer version without the new functionality, without rebuilding the entire flow, excuse me? And Brandon, I think this one is about auto layout for you.
Sure thing, I can go ahead and take that one. That's a great question. If you have a flow that was previously built using what we're calling the free-form canvas, what will happen is you'll see the auto layout option in the toolbar like we showed in the demo. And then when you try to enable that, if there are any errors or any reasons why that flow cannot be converted to auto layout, then you'll get a dialog box that will throw you warnings and errors and tell you why. But in general, no, you don't have to start from scratch. You can take a freeform canvas flow and simply click that button and in general, convert it to auto layout like we saw in the demo.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. Sam, a couple of questions for you. When should I use sections versus the 2-column layout in App Builder?
You should always use sections. 2-column layout is just not as good, and safe harbor. It is not long for this world. We will eventually be end-of-lifing that feature. The way the Lightning page option worked was you built your flow in Flow Builder, and then you came over to App Builder and ticked it, and then it would alternate the fields into 2 sections, which is really hard when you're building the flow, because you have to mentally remember, oh, the first name field is going to be over here and the last name field is going to be over here. If you build with sections, you can get that visual representation yourself, and you get a lot more control. You can have up to 4 columns instead of just 2, and you can control the widths of them, as well as control visibility of the fields in those sections.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Next question. Is there a way to control the batch size for platform event flows?
I can take that one. The answer is right now, no, there is no way. It's something we're discussing. It's not on the near-term roadmap. But if you all have really compelling reasons or use cases for it, go ahead and post it on the community and help us justify prioritizing it.
Great. That's always great advice to ask folks to post or upvote an idea there. Next question is from Jordan. When a schedule path fires, let's say after 5 days, does it use the data of the record as of 5 days ago or data as of the day the scheduled path fires?
It's the current information. So we want those scheduled paths to always be working with the up-to-date information in the system. We're not sort of holding on to ghost artifacts of the past. So yeah, it's always going to be whatever's currently running.
Great. That is great. Let me see here. Other questions we've got in. This is a great question from Steve Mo. With everything moving to Flow Builder, will there be any tools available to help admins move or convert existing workflows and processes to Flow?
Yes, it is our hope. That is also on our roadmap. We are looking at closing those remaining gaps, which many of you have mentioned in the comments. And then we're also looking at migration tools. There's also been some community tools built on unofficial SF. So if you want to get an early head start, you can use those, but we have official migration tools in the works as well.
Great. And can any of you speak to maybe some great resources additionally that you've seen about Flow if you're just maybe getting started and you're excited about all of this innovation?
I can take that. For most things with Salesforce, the first stop should always be Trailhead. We have a few Flow specific trails, and I believe there was actually one just released recently about Flow troubleshooting. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, I'm really excited to do it myself. There is also unofficial SF, which is run by another member of our product team, Alex Edelstein. Is contributed to by many members of the community. And then we recently, last year, released the architect decision guides that Diana talked about. We have the one about record triggered flows. We also have one about building forms of when to use flow versus lightning components. And those are really good for the big decision-making kind of architectural review if you're interested in that information.
Thank you, Sam. Next question is about email. So this is from Kaylee. Are rich emails replacing the need for lightning email templates in Flow?
I'll take that. I can see there being different use cases for both. The magic of the rich ability for send email is that you can write your email out of your flow. You don't have to go off and write your template somewhere else. You can easily reference the resources of the records you've retrieved from the database or values from a screen directly from the flow. If you're using templates for other reasons, I think it's also valuable to be able to leverage that in your flow and have one place to maintain that same email.
Great, thank you. There was a Twitter question here from Christopher, who's actually looking forward to debugging flows. But the question is, how does clicking the emailed link respond when the email sent to me is forwarded to my tier 1 specialist who has a profile other than system administrator?
I can take that. So I believe, and double check in the release notes, but I believe we've designed this so you just need the manage flow user permission to be able to open the hyperlink. Now, if the email is not being sent to the right person, right now your only choice really is to either add them to the distribution list or forward the email to them. But coming soon, we expect to make these debug logs available directly from setup. So today, you have that paused flow interview list view. We're probably going to be changing that to the saved flow interviews, and it will have a log of all of your failed runs that you can open directly from setup, so you don't have to lean on the email for everything.
I saw some excited claps from Sam on that one. So that's great. Brandon, I'll throw you another question about auto layout. How do you move an element to another place in the flow?
That's a good question. Sam or Diana, do you have any immediate thoughts on that?
So there is a copy element.
I believe that. Yes, that's right. The only way to move stuff is to basically copy the element, and then you can paste it in the right place.
And a follow-up also about auto layout from Esty. Will we be able to use auto layout mode with flows that navigate back to an earlier element in the flow? So not talking about standard loops.
Gotcha. So my understanding is that that's actually going to be one of the limitations, is that auto layout is not currently available to support that feature. So that will be one of those situations where you're using one of those go-to elements, and if you were to try to convert that to auto layout, it would give you a warning or error message.
Great, thanks. And I'm seeing a lot of questions and comments too about new features and things being added to auto layout. So the community is a great place to continue to post these questions and feedback. So thanks everybody who's jumping in there and sharing them. The next question coming to us from Twitter is from Jennifer. With record trigger flows, what do you recommend? Separate flows for each scenario, or one before save and another after update record trigger flow per object?
This is one of the big questions and debates going on, I would say, in the Flownatic and triggered automation community. Previously, we have said if you were using Process Builder that we recommend putting everything in one trigger as much as possible. We have seen performance challenges because of that, and just general management challenges where different people are editing the same thing all at once or things are updating. So now we'd say definitely go more by scenario. That's also why a few releases ago, we introduced the entry criteria, which I also talk about for scheduled flows that can help you scope when your record triggered automation is firing. So I would say lean more towards by scenario. The case where we see people still wanting to combine things into one is where you really care about order of operations. So if these things are independent, you can keep them independent. If they're really interdependent, it can help to put them all in one. Also for something like before save, where you want to really try to optimize how quickly you're doing those field updates. If you have a lot of decisions or branching logic there, you may want to put that in one, but it kind of depends on your organization and your needs.
Thank you. Our next question, we are just running through these, trying to get to as many as we can today. Any chance we could get a column or a list view filter on the setup screen for flows that denotes the initiating object of record trigger flows? It sure would be nice to find all related to opportunities in one spot.
I think you'll see Tim and I laughing because this is definitely something we would like to get to very soon. So yes, definitely high on the priority roadmap list. And a little trickier than you might think. So we're getting it in there, but it would definitely be really useful.
Great. Thanks, Diana. Question from John. When will we be able to schedule on a monthly basis? Is there a way to track a batch's progress as it runs?
So those are two questions, I think, a little bit. So schedule, we don't have short-term roadmap to schedule by the month. You can do things like 30 days or 28 days if you're okay approximating a month, or you can do every 4 weeks if you're using a scheduled flow. In terms of monitoring the batch, I don't know if Tim, you want to chime in, but other than using kind of the debug logs and some of the more developer-y tools is where we see people managing that, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think that scheduled flows are architected in a way that there's actually a batch queued up and waiting. So there's no monitoring because it's literally like the schedule evaluates on the time and the day that it's been set to run against. For scheduled paths, which I think Diana shipped this release, if you go to the time-based workflow monitoring page, you will be able to monitor and see some information about the scheduled paths that you've set up in a triggered flow. So I think that is definitely documented in the release notes because I read them yesterday. So go check it out. And it's going to be a familiar user interface that I know you all love.
Yes, and it will allow you to delete as well, which is an ask I know we've had on schedule.
Awesome. That's super exciting. Let's shift for a minute and talk. We have a lot of questions about rich text emails. So question from Estella, now that we will be able to send rich text emails from our flow, will we also be able to apply rich text formatting to the message posted to Chatter from Flow?
That's such a good question, and I very much understand your pain. It's so annoying that anything that I post to Chatter is just this plain text and all the HTML gets marked up visually. It is on our list of considerations to enhance our actions, but we don't have a specific schedule in mind for that. If you really, really want that functionality, you should check out on Unofficial SF. An action published does send rich Chatter posts.
Great. Thank you. And also on rich formatted emails, if I want to embed a table, is there a way to do that?
Yep. Yeah. Basically anything that like HTML emails will handle, as long as your email client is willing to receive it, those will be sent. As Brandon mentioned in the demo, the best way to deal with HTML emails is to use the text template because you have much more space to compose your email. If you need more HTML than the rich text formatting tool allows, then you should change the text template to plain text mode, and then you can write your HTML manually. You might also be able to copy it in from somewhere else, and then change it back to rich text, and you should see that table, and it should work just fine.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is from Emily. What sort of scheduled actions in Flow would be used to send emails when the date value in a records field equals today's current date?
So how scheduled actions work in Process Builder, the terminology was a little different, but when it was talking about now or today, it was talking about when that trigger fired, which is the same thing as the created or updated date field that you'll see in scheduled paths. If you actually, as I sort of talked about scheduled paths and scheduled flows, if you actually care that it runs today and you care about the calendar and not about, say, a date in the system, like your current date equals today or your close date equals today, then you could do that and just schedule it on the calendar using scheduled flows. But otherwise you could do, 0 hours from, and then use the dates in scheduled paths, or the triggered date would be the other one. That would be analogous.
Thanks, Diana. And another question for you. This actually came in from multiple folks. How do I debug a record change triggered flow?
Yes, that is also on the list of things we are working on right now. So currently today, you do need to make the change in your system. So activate your flow in a sandbox environment. And that's mainly because we're still working on the pieces that capture that change. So we offered things like prior record. And so adding that into debug is a little bit of extra work. We're almost there. So stay tuned for that soon, but it's not available today. One of the cool things about the way Tim did those debug error emails, though, is you'll still be able to open up your errors and see the path that ran through. So we're kind of slowly building out that functionality, but we will get that debug button working very soon.
Great. Thanks so much. Next question for you, Tim, is about debugging subflows. So how do I debug subflows?
So right now, you can debug a subflow from the master flow. The problem with that is we don't really give you a good way to peek in to the subflow and see exactly what's in it. So it's not the smoothest experience. One best practice I do recommend is to try and design your subflows to be as independent of who's calling them as you can, and test them individually. It's something we're going to be working on. Is making subflows easier to manage and easier to debug. So right now, though, my recommendation would be test them both as unit pieces and then test them within the context of your master flow to really, get the end-to-end working.
Great. Our next question here, we have a few questions about batch size. So from Dan, is controlling the batch size on the roadmap. So when a flow has to handle a large number of records, you can lower the batch size to avoid lock row errors and CPU limits.
I think, at a meta level, these are all related to performance, discussions about performance. And, one thing we're very aware of is historically, I think customers have found themselves burned by performance issues in Process Builder. And so, with triggered flows, we've definitely re-engineered a lot of the pieces that Process Builder was unperformant. And at this time, when it comes to increasing the performance, we have a lot of different options on the table, and batch size control is one of them. We've also been discussing enabling flows to run asynchronously outside of the save order so that you don't even have to worry about their impact on the CPU time in the transaction. So, we don't have anything concrete right now. We are definitely assessing a bunch of different strategies. And of course, we want to make sure that we are weighing against it the manageability and the ease of use that you currently have grown to expect from Flow. So stay tuned. I definitely would recommend, let's talk about it in the community, and we are welcoming your feedback.
Thanks, Tim. Back to you, Diana, with a question from Kothai. What happens to schedules if we inactivate the flow or activate a new flow with different rules?
So it will pick up new versions. I think there was also a question about versions that I saw, and it will use the latest if that gets reactivated. So once that schedule comes back, it'll be using the new logic. If the flow is fully deactivated, then I believe they will also turn off as well, but I'll confirm that and put that in the comments in case that's wrong. Again, if that isn't the case, you can always go in and delete them from the time-based workflow page, but I'm pretty sure if you deactivate the flow, they'll go away.
Great, thank you. Next question from, let's see here. Next question from Anne. What happens with time-dependent action if you change the flow version? Do the old actions take their filters from the new version?
Yeah, so that is the thing. They will take it from the new version, which is why I also believe if you deactivate, it'll stop working. So they'll always recheck against the latest data in the system, the latest flow configuration that's active.
Great. And what if the prior value is null? What would happen? Would a flow fail? Do we need a null check, i.e. a decision? That came from Eric on Twitter.
Yeah, so those of you who are longtime flow fanatics will know of the frustration around null checks, where if you forget that a value could be null somewhere, sometimes your flow will just blow up. We did actually change that in the last release, I think in winter 21. It was a version change. So what we do with versions is we'll only release it on new flows or flows that you've gone in and manually upgraded, and that's to make sure that your flows are running consistently and we're not making any behavioral changes that could do kind of weird subtle logic differences. So yes, prior record can return null. In general, hopefully, if you're trying it out new, you'll see that we've cleaned up those null checks. So it should just return false or whatever your decision criteria is expecting, rather than requiring that extra decision and an extra step.
Got it. Thank you, Diana. One question from Selena. How is the running user determined for scheduled paths? I have a user I can't deactivate because she's the running user of many paused flow interviews.
Yes, that is a big frustration. So the user who triggers the record update change will be the running user for both that before save or after save path, and then also for the scheduled paths. However, we will fall back. In your process automation settings, there's a default workflow user that you can set up to be a generic user on the system or somebody else. And all flows that have inactive users will fall back to that. So you won't get stuck not being able to deactivate a user because their paths are still around.
Great. Question from Jennifer. Is the ability to use formula syntax for conditions in Flow Builder like we can in Process Builder on the roadmap?
Yes, it is. So there are some ways to do formulas, but I think we all recognize on this team that they're not as easy to use as Process Builder. Process Builder, it's inline, there's a lot more validation, there's a lot more guidance on what you should do for formulas. So you can today reference a formula as a resource, but we're looking at ways to make that simpler and give you more feedback so it's as easy or more easy to do than it is in Process Builder today. So definitely on the sort of ease of use roadmap for us.
Great. A question from Austin. Will there be a rich text input component added to screen flows to complement the rich text send email action?
Yeah, I will take that one. It is a great idea, and it's something that I've been thinking about that we should do. It's just not on our immediate roadmap right now. Right now, we're looking into how we might improve choices, which I know is another big pain point for folks. Basically, it's on our consideration list, and we would love to hear if there are a lot of people who would be really interested in the rich text, and that would help us raise the priority of when we want to deliver.
Thanks, Sam. So Austin, or anybody else who's interested in this, make sure to find Austin's post in the community and follow up, comment, let us know there. Next question here is from Leah. Oh, excuse me, I jumped ahead on my question list. What are the plans to simplify setting up flows beyond layouts?
Is there more to that question?
That is all I got here. Sorry about that.
Simplification is like generally a huge initiative for us, one that we're always thinking about. I know Diana has a lot of thoughts about it, from kind of how we make it really easy for someone to learn Flow, especially from this record triggered point of view. And I'm looking at it from a screen flow point of view. I know there was a comment asking about like rich email is great, but I have to use this silly global constant option to enable the rich email. That makes it harder, and it makes it harder for Flow, for people to learn Flow. It makes it scary. And those are all things that we are very aware of. In particular, that email issue is one that we want to look at in the next couple of releases and give you a really guided configuration experience. That is a bit of a rambly answer to say simplification is something we're constantly thinking about, and it is definitely one of our goals, and it kind of comes in fits and starts.
Yeah, I would say that's something we're all thinking about, probably different for different scenarios. But that's a great thing to leave comments about, because often we as PMs all have a lot of opinions about what needs to be easier or how it needs to be easier, but there's nothing like our real users who are going in and doing it every day telling us exactly what's painful, or what, if you're using Flow for the first time and you found something really confusing, that's really great feedback for us to make sure that we're prioritizing the best we can.
Great, thank you. Next question here from Emily, and I think a few of you touched on this before around resources, but Emily wants to know if we plan to transition from Process Builder to Flow for all our automation, what would be the least disruptive recommended method for doing so? And are there resources available related to transitioning from Process Builder to Flow?
So definitely stay tuned. We are in the process of building out both tooling and documentation type resources. I would say there's a couple approaches you could do now if you want to get a head start on it. So one is just starting as you're making changes to just pull in specific pieces of automation or sort of functional areas. If you're already going in and maybe looking at your automation, I would say in a specific area, or thinking about making updates or retooling, that's a really good time to just kind of take a piece out of Process Builder and put it in Flow. Another thing we've seen people do is go by object. So pick a specific object and look at all the record triggered automation that's on it, and then pull it over that way. Again, you can use things like entry criteria to choose your pieces, but I would say to do it in in some chunks and validate that and make sure that things are still working, and then take it another piece at a time.
Great. Thank you. Sam, I'm going to throw our last question over to you to end us with some more roadmap discussion. Can you tell us, is there more on the roadmap for emails in Flow?
Yeah. I think I hinted at this earlier. Some of the things that are top of mind for us is making how you configure the send email element a million times better than it is today. We want you to be able to compose your email directly in that element without having to go to the text template. We want it to be easy to switch from rich to plain text. And we want to make it really simple to choose the right sender type. Like, do you want to send it from your org-wide email address or from the running user? All these things that are just like really hard and you have to depend a lot on doc. The other things on our list for email roadmap are supporting templates outside of email alerts. So imagine the send email action. You could either DIY directly in the flow by composing the email, or you could leverage an existing template that you're using for other reasons. And so those are the things that we have in mind, although we don't have a set schedule yet for them.
Awesome. It's always great to hear some of that roadmap discussion here. So thank you, Sam, Tim, Diana, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks everyone for your patience. We will try to get to as many of your questions on Twitter and the Trailblazer community as we can in the next few days. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Release Readiness Live.